Okay, hello everybody. Happy Monday. So the last puzzle that we did, we went over the importance of the cell membrane. We didn't go over the importance of it. We went over the structure of it, right? We talked about that's made of a bunch of phospholipids that form a phospholipid bilayer, and it has these different kinds of proteins attached to it, right, floating around along the cell membrane. It has transport proteins. Um, Receptor proteins and marker proteins, right? Now, the only one that we're going to be worried about today are the transport proteins because we're going to start talking about cell transport. Hopefully, by now you know that I'm referring to the transport of materials into and out of the cell. We've been kind of alluding to that, talking about that all last week, and we even have a egg lab set up in class where we are going to be seeing how water can go in and out of the egg through its semi-permeable membrane this week. All right. Anyway, so the cell membrane is selectively permeable. Hopefully you already know what this means. Go ahead and take a moment to show me that you do. Okay, hopefully you got that right. The answer is that it's going to allow things to pass through. That's what permeable means. If you are a fan of My Hero Academia, then think about the hero Lemillion. He's a lot of people's favorite hero in the show. He has the quirk or the superpower permeation. So he calls it permeation. He calls it permeation because he's able to pass through things, right? Um, that's what permeation means, the ability to pass through. So if something is permeable, it can be passed through. Hopefully that helps you remember. So the cell membrane, it's not fully permeable. I've been saying semi-permeable. This is going to say selectively permeable because it allows certain things to pass through, but not other things. In some cases, it can decide to let things in or out only when it needs to. This is going to help the cell maintain homeostasis. Right. So the cell membrane is fairly permeable to water. And so what that would mean, if I were to put that in my own words, I would say the cell membrane allows water to pass through fairly easily. A lot of this is going to be review for us. All right, we've talked about. You're going to see a lot of vocab here that is recognizable. Except for this word, passive transport. This is going to be on our vocab quizzes this week. So what does passive transport mean? Well, you should already know what transport means when we're talking about cells. It's talking about the transport of materials into and out of the cell, right? So what does it mean if that transport is passive? Go ahead and try and take your best guess. All right. Well, let's think about it together. Let's think of the word passive. So if I was being passive aggressive, a lot of us know what that means, right? If I'm being passive aggressive and I want to take a jab at you guys, right? What's something I could say that would be passive aggressive to you? Let's say you all wanted to play a game of Among Us, or if you wanted some like extra credit or something, right? Maybe I would be like, well, maybe I would have given you extra credit if you all turned in your homework, right? That would be passive aggressive. It's passive because I'm not being so up, like I'm not being I'm not putting a lot of energy into it, right? There is not a lot of energy required in being passive aggressive. I can do it on the down low, right? As opposed to being very actively aggressive. That'd be more screaming, finger pointing, shaking, but no, I'm being very passive about it and being chill about my aggression, right? Seriously, though, you guys don't do enough homework. Just kidding. I'm teasing. So one example of passive transport is diffusion. We've talked about this many times. It's the movement of substances from a place of higher concentration to lower concentration. In other words, a movement of substances from crowded areas to less crowded areas. We're going to go over the example of a perfume bottle here. All right, so if I take the cap off of this perfume, which is a bunch of gas, what are they going to do? They're going to start spreading out, right? Watch more closely. Right? They're going to spread out until they fill the space that they've been given. And now let's pretend now they're in that box, right? This box that the picture is in. They're not going to go anywhere else. There's nowhere else for them to go. The concentration is now equal in all areas. Except that there's still a higher concentration in that perfume bottle, I'm sure, but it would continue to disperse as time goes on, like so. But we're not talking about an open area like that. We're talking about cells. So what does diffusion look like in cells? Again, we've gone over this. You should know what's about to happen. The yellow dots are going to represent ammonia, and the two white dots next to each other are going to represent oxygen gas. Right now, there is a higher actually, you tell me. Is there a higher or a lower concentration of ammonia inside the cell? Hopefully, you're able to see that there is a higher concentration of ammonia inside the cell. And so, my next question is the ammonia in this area, inside and outside the cell, is more ammonia going to go in the cell, or is more ammonia going to leave the cell? And hopefully, you were able to get that right as well. Ammonia is going to start leaving the cell. As so. Right? What about the oxygen gas? Well, let's just go through it. You could see that there's a higher concentration of oxygen gas outside the cell, so it's going to move in. Right? And eventually it's going to get to a point where it's equal. Okay? When that happens, the substances have achieved equilibrium. All right, so what does it mean if something's at equilibrium? It means that the substances are equal on both sides of the membrane. Now, even at equilibrium, these things are still moving around. They're still going into and out of the cell, but at the same ratio, at the same rate. So there's still it's still at equilibrium because there's an equal amount of parts moving in and out of the cell, like this. Still at equilibrium. And sometimes, though, as you just saw, things are going to move in. So now there's a slightly higher concentration of ammonia inside the cell than there is outside, but it will be fixed pretty quickly because things will then move out of the cell a moment later. But it will generally fluctuate at the exact level of equilibrium. Here's the exact definition. So when the concentration of solute in a solution is equal on both sides of the membrane. So the cytoplasm of the cell, as well as the outside of the cell, those are both solutions, right? A solution, it's just a mixture of liquid and stuff dissolved in the liquid. Usually water is that liquid. Water is the solvent, and the stuff that's dissolved in it are the solutes. All right. So we just went over the basics of diffusion and how we reach equilibrium. Now let's talk about facilitated diffusion. What does it mean if something is facilitated? The word facilitate means to help. So this is diffusion being helped. What organelle do you think is going to be facilitating diffusion of things into and out of the cell? Hopefully, based on context clues over the past week and things we've been talking about this class, you were able to answer the cell membrane. All right, the cell membrane is going to facilitate this diffusion. It's going to help make diffusion possible. Larger molecules need the help of transport proteins to enter the cell. Here is a cell membrane. All right, here, this hexagon is some material. This needs help going into the cell because it's too big to go through the phospholipid bilayer. So it's going to use the help of this protein channel right here. Right? Facilitated diffusion will be a vocab word on the quiz this week, by the way. So there are a bunch of different protein channels for very specific things. In this picture here, you can see that this protein channel is for these red substrates, right? These red pieces of material. It's not going to fit this, whatever this orange block is representing. Having a bunch of different proteins for different things is going to help with the regulation of materials in and out of the cell. If every protein was able to fit every solute, then that regulation would be more difficult for the cell to accomplish. And this is generally how it works in facilitated diffusion. There's some kind of binding site on the protein, and that material fits it perfectly. And when it fits into it, it activates it and makes it open on the other side, allowing it to pass through. And then when there is no longer a binding, it will retract back. All right. And again, this is passive, so there's no energy needed here. Not from the cell anyway. All right, so osmosis is another kind of facilitated diffusion. Hopefully you remember what osmosis means. Go ahead and fill in this blank for me. Osmosis is the diffusion of what across the cell membrane? Hopefully you were able to get that right. It is the diffusion of water. Across the cell membrane. Right. In most cases, water can diffuse more easily than other substances. This is going to help the cell maintain homeostasis more easily without the use of excess energy. That being is because other substances, to move other things across the membrane, the cell's going to have to use its own energy, right? So it's much easier. It's going to take less energy for the cell to just be able to move water across the cell membrane than it would other substances. So because water is able to move more easily across the cell membrane, it overall saves the cell energy in that way. And water is going to do this until it achieves equilibrium. Okay. Let's do some practice stuff. You're about to see a lot of words that we went over many times last week. Right now, is there a higher concentration of water inside the cell, this yellow area, or is there a higher concentration of water outside the cell? Hopefully you were able to answer that the higher concentration of water is outside the cell. That brings us to a next question. So if there's a higher concentration of water outside the cell, then is water going to diffuse into the cell or out of the cell. And hopefully you were able to figure that water is going to flow in to the cell. So what happens to the size of the cell if water flows into it, right? Well, we know it's going to swell up like such. I'll do it again in case you didn't see it, right? Check this out. It's gonna get bigger. Let's do some practice problems here. I'm gonna do a practice problem for you, and then I want you guys to answer a bunch on your own. So we have a cell with 97% of water and 3% of dissolved stuff inside of it, right? That makes sense. 97% of water plus the 3% of other stuff makes 100%. Okay. So this cell is placed in a 6% salt solution, meaning that the solution is 6% salt, which means it's how much percent water? Let me go through this for you. If the outside is 6% salt, then that means it must be 94% water. I'm correct, obviously. So let me think here. The question is, will the cell shrink or get bigger? Well, if there is a higher concentration of water inside the cell and a lower concentration of water outside the cell, then I would think that this water is going to leave the cell. So if stuff is leaving the cell, it's going to shrink until they're both at the same percentage of water. I was right. Imagine that. Right? It's going to shrink until it also reaches 94%. So let's have you guys go through this. Oh, I'm sorry. First, here's these vocab words which you've seen 10,000 times. So isotonic solution. Quick review. What does that mean? You know what? Never mind. We'll skip this. You guys know it. This means that they're going to be equal on both sides already. There's not going to be a change in the cell because it's already the same. The cell is going to remain the same size. What about in a hypertonic solution? What does that mean? Right? That means that there's too much hyper. Remember when I said it means a lot? There's too much solute in it. That's a solution that has a greater concentration of solutes compared to the cell cytoplasm, right? Here's an example. That just the one that we just did actually. That means that the stuff inside here is going to leave the cell because in this hypertonic solution there is a greater amount of solute in it than there is in the cell. So the cell is going to end up losing water and shrink. Right? Well, the hypotonic solution, you guys know this already. That means that there is too little solute. It has a lower concentration of solutes compared to the cell cytoplasm. Example, right? This water is almost pure. It's 99% and just 1% water, right? So where's the water going to go? Inside or outside the cell? You guys already should know this. It's going to go into the cell. And so the cell is going to swell up. It's going to get bigger. Oh, you can't see all that. There we go. Think of hippos being fat when trying to remember what a hypotonic solution does to the size of a cell. Hypo, hippo, hippos are fat, so cells get fatter when they're in a hypotonic solution. That's good. All right. Right. So in the case of a red blood cell in an isotonic solution, it would look the same because it's equal. If it were in a hypotonic solution, it would swell up because it would take in a bunch of water. And if it were in a hypertonic solution, it would shrivel because water would leave it. All right, here's the part you're going to do. So in a solution that has 10% of, let's say, salt, What percent of this solution is water? Hopefully you're able to figure, well, if 10% is salt or whatever, then then it has to add up to 100. So the other percentage of water must be 90. Okay. Um, in the cell, if there's 3% of solute, what percentage is water? Hopefully you're able to do the math by yourself and figure it's 97%. So now this solution here, is this a hypertonic solution, a hypotonic solution, or an isotonic solution? Compare the percentages of water to help you figure it out. Which one has more water? Which one has less water? So this is a hypertonic solution. We know it's hypertonic because you you know that water is going to leave the cell because there's more water in the cell and less water outside of the cell. Right? So the cell's going to do what? Very good. It's going to shrink. Next one. So in the second solution, this solution has 0% dissolved stuff. So what percent is water? Hopefully you're able to get 100% correct. In the cell, if 2% of the stuff in the cell is solutes, what percent is water? Hopefully you got it, 98%. So that makes this solution hypertonic, hypotonic, or isotonic. Hopefully you were able to figure, well, there is more water in this solution than in the cell. So then that means the water is going to go into the cell, which would mean that this is going to be a hypotonic solution, right? And so the cell will do what? It will get bigger. Okay, last one. Looks like the solution and the cell both have 4% of dissolved solutes, so they're both going to have what percentage of water? Hopefully you got it, 96%. That makes this solution it's the last one. It's a isotonic. I'm not going to make questions on this because it's the last one. Obviously, it's isotonic. Okay, so the cell is going to stay the same. Let's talk about how this affects plants. So plant cells in hyper and hypotonic solution. So in a hypotonic solution, the cell is going to want to get bigger, right? Because there is more water outside of the cell, right? However, that cell wall on a plant cell, it's very sturdy. So because it's so sturdy, whenever it sucks in that water, it's not going to swell up so much. All it's really going to do, it's going to make the pressure build up on that very firm wall and just kind of support it and make it stronger, making the plant stiff and strong. That's why when you water your plants appropriately, they stand tall. If you don't water your plants, though, then you're really putting your plants in a hypertonic solution. If you put your plants in a hypertonic solution, then the water is going to leave the plant cells, making the plant cells shrink, and that's going to not support the cell walls. And if the cell walls aren't supported, then they're going to wilt and be flimsy. Water your plants. Right? Here's just a picture of a plant cell. And there is a plant cell with a full central vacuole. It has enough water, but if you place it in a hypertonic solution, the water will leave and those cell walls become very flimsy. And the cell membrane isn't right up against it, right? So the cell wall now has all of that room to be flimsy compared to before. All right, and next week we'll go over active transport.